You're still watching Africa Today. Some survivors of colonial-era abuses in Kenya have criticised the United Kingdom's King Charles for not going far enough after he expressed his deepest regret for what he described as abhorrent and unjustifiable acts of violence. King Charles and Queen Camilla are on a 4-day state visit in Kenya.
Britain's King Charles may have expressed his deepest regret for colonial-era abuses in Kenya. But for some, it's not enough. Gideon Mungai was an underground operative during the 1952 to 1960 Mau Mau revolt, which was brutally put down by British colonial forces.
His expression of regret, without apologizing, means he is still holding back. Let him withhold whatever it is. His government tortured us.
Some 90,000 Kenyans were killed or maimed in the period known as the emergency, according to the Kenya Human Rights Commission. 160,000 were detained, with many subjected to torture. Mungai and other survivors have criticized Charles's failure to issue a full apology or propose reparations.
What would make me even happier in my old age is the return of the grabbed land. I may not be able to benefit from it, but my descendants will be proud of our struggle.
United Nations investigators have also said that British colonialists committed gross human rights violations against hundreds of thousands of people in western Kenya over decades. That included land expropriation, killings, and sexual violence. In downtown Nairobi on Wednesday, resident Nicholas Mwangai said Kenya still bears the scars.
Him saying the only regrets are not offering an official apology goes a long way to show that they hardly acknowledge the kind of past the British monarch and colonialism has caused this country. And the consequence of colonialism continue to shape our lives today.
Charles expressed his regret during a state dinner on Tuesday, in which he described colonial-era abuses as abhorrent and unjustifiable acts of violence. The UK agreed to pay a $24 million settlement in 2013 to more than 5,200 survivors of abuses during the emergency. But it has refused to issue an apology and has rebuffed claims by other communities. Paul Muite, a senior Kenyan lawyer who represented Mau Mau veterans in the 2013 case, said there were more than 2,000 additional victims of abuses during the emergency who did not receive compensation. The royal visit also comes at a time when Britain is under pressure to do more to recognize colonial-era abuses. Some, notably Barbados and Jamaica, have been re-evaluating their ties to the monarchy. In Kenya on Tuesday, President William Ruto praised what he called a highly encouraging first step to go beyond the tentative and equivocal half measures of past years. But for some in Kenya, and indeed across other former colonies, the UK is not yet doing enough.
Now to discuss Kenya as it charts a new path with its former colonial master, we are joined by Senior Lecturer and Chairman at the Department of History and Archaeology at the University of Nairobi, Dr. Kenneth Ombongi. Dr. Kenneth, appreciate your time this evening. Now, why did King Charles III express deepest regret for colonial-era abuses in Kenya during his state visit? And what specific acts of violence and injustices was he referring to?
You see, specifically, really, King Charles was referring to the atrocities committed mainly during the Mau Mau movement, which included displacement of many people, particularly in the central province of Kenya, which we ordinarily refer to here as Mount Kenya, and also the killing, and the torture and the detaining of so many people. Actually, you mentioned the upwards of 160,000 people were detained People were put in, enclosed villages for close surveillance and monitoring. And there were reported abuses of children, women, and men. So it's a wide range of atrocities committed against the Africans, and this was not confined to the 1950s during the Mau Mau, but it cuts across the history of the British rule in Kenya from about 1895 to 1963 when they left. Land alienation from the owners, and also displacement that was witnessed in a wide range of areas to create room for the British settlers and British farmers who could dominate Kenya's agrarian economy during the colonial period. Those are some of the atrocities I think King Charles III was referring to.
Now the issue is that he hasn't apologized, even though the United Kingdom has agreed or has agreed to pay something in the region of 24 million United States dollars. What is the importance of him actually issuing an apology? And in your view, why has he not apologized?
Well, I think the very unfortunate, very violent history of the British rule in Kenya is one that requires a closure. And I think the closure will not come just because of the payment that was done a few years back to just a small group of people, or those who suffered during this era and their descendants. Now, for it to come to a close, it will take a serious apology, and an apology that will include actually a commitment to taking liability of the atrocities that the British committed here. And I think the main reason why King Charles will not go that direction, and I don't foresee that happening with the British in any time in the future, is an equivocal apology to the atrocities committed in Kenya will literally open a Pandora's box of the atrocities that the British committed elsewhere in the world. At some point, I'm sure we all know that the British dominated a very large part of our world today, from South Asia, which is modern India, Pakistan, and all the countries there, to the South Pacific, West Africa, South Africa, and some parts of East Africa were all British colonies. And in each of these areas, the key characteristics of the British rule was actually violence and atrocities committed against the local people. If you were not talking about the Jallianwala massacre in India in 1919, you are talking about the bloodletting during the state of emergency declared in Kenya in 1952. And this happened in many other areas of the world. So giving an apology, I think, according to the British, will open up a Pandora's box and bring up things that they are not going to afford to pay for, or at least take liability of their actions at that time when the British Empire, as it were called then, covered a greater part of the world. So it is something that they proceed with caution. If you listen to the address of the king here in Nairobi, it was calculated, it was measured, and had a lot of what I regard as English speak, actually, just to try and placate and assuage the emotions that characterize, the mention of the history of violence that characterize the British rule here. So I think that's the main reason why we don't expect anytime soon for the British to issue an apology against these atrocities. And of course, I think that the purpose, if you ask me, the purpose of King Charles coming to this region and choosing Kenya to be the first country to visit after his coronation has much more than regretting about their past and not least apologizing. As you realize, the international system around us at the moment is increasingly becoming multipolar. Multipolar meaning we have many actors and many nations trying to compete to dominate our international system. And we are increasingly seeing a situation where we have rivalry between the East, led by China, and the West, of course, led by America and Europe. And the unfortunate situation is that just like it was in the 1880s, during the scramble and partition for Africa, we are having the scramble and partition for Africa too. And in the current situation, rivalry between the East and the West, Africa seems just like it was in the 1880s, going to be a victim of the library of international powers. The only difference this time round is that it is involving the East and the West. In 1884-85, during the Berlin Conference, it only involved the European powers. And here we are, and the interest on Africa increases by the day. The heavy presence of China, the heavy presence of the British and the Americans, this speaks of a situation where every country is trying to extend its influence over the continent. So I believe that within the wider matrix of the pursuit of the British foreign policy, that is the first of the reasons why the British royalty were here in Nairobi, because Kenya is actually a prominent partner with the British when it comes to the UK's foreign policy.
Now, finally, before we let you go, we've just got a minute to wrap this up. So let's talk about how this conversation fits into the broader conversation where many former colonies are seeking reparations of sorts from their former colonizers.
Well, I think it is something that has gripped a number of countries in Africa, much more vibrant in West Africa than in East Africa. And we have seen the fate of France, really, particularly in West Africa, getting increasingly challenged by Anglophone West Africa. The situation in East Africa with Kenya in particular, we don't foresee such a violent break of the link with Britain happening because in the wider pattern of the relationship between the UK and Kenya, it's been characterized of some kind of love and hate. And we will see that binary of love and hate for many years to come, in my view. And increasingly, if you listen to King Charles speak and our own President, Dr. Ruto, speak, it looks like they are determined to strengthen the relationship between the two countries. And I guess on the side of Kenya, they are going to seek something we loosely call in diplomatic history positive engagement, where they will gain as much as they will want to do from either the British or the Americans or the Chinese, just like it was during the Cold War. So I foresee the situation going to be a little bit worse with Francophone Africa compared to Anglophone Africa.
Dr. Ombongi, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for speaking to us.